I've seen malware that literally renamed the code section to .virus, which was like,
Thanks.
okay, I believe you.
And I have some questions about kind of the broader scope of malware to begin with. Are there ways that people who are creating this are also using machine learning? It's also one of these problems where you're always chasing, and it seems like there's so much more flexibility for what the people who are creating this are doing in terms of randomness and trying things based on volume compared to what you're trying to do, which is scale something that's more generalizable. I mean, that's always a very difficult problem to tackle, right? Is that you're always chasing, and hopefully you can get something that's built to scale, but they're building things that are focused on optimizing or focusing on targeting individual, very small idiosyncrasies. So you're going general, they're going specific constantly. And that battle is just such a fascinating, conceptual thing in my mind.
Yeah, that's actually, that alludes to something that I think a lot of the academic work in this space loses track of. You can get very focused in on well, what could go what could go wrong? What could you fail to get? What could the adversary do to circumvent you and to subvert you and to succeed despite your efforts and time? And the answer is almost always they can't defeat you. But that does not mean that the work is useless. Especially in malware, there's sort of this huge spectrum of things that are just super lazy, and the malware authors are just blasting it off and hoping that people are dumb or
numbers game.
Yeah, they're just playing a numbers game. And then there's script kiddies who are just they don't really know what they're doing. They just downloaded this thing online, or they learned about poison ivy, and it's this little point and click interface to make malware and sending it to their friends or doing whatever stupidity that they're getting into.
Don't give the community any ideas.
That's another there's a lot of low hanging fruit that still needs to be stopped. Is still a problem. And then there's all the way on the extreme end of malware written by entire criminal organizations that can have a literal team of people working on something and spending time on it and reverse engineering it. And when you get into some of the absurdities of what malware. So I'll give you two high-end examples on what malware could do. That's just kind of crazy if they're trying to accomplish their goal, and then just some of the stupid stuff I've seen. So there's malware that will literally have its own instruction set in order to make it more difficult to reverse engineer. And so they have their own virtual machine, kind of similar to the Java virtual machine, except it's their own custom one. And every time that the malware propagates, or they compile and send out a new version, it will generate a new randomized instruction set with a new virtual machine. So that every single time you're trying to look at this malware, it looks completely different, and it's got a whole new instruction set that you have to reverse engineer every single time. Which is just that's currently a really annoying thing to people in this space today. Because there are no good tools for dealing with this stupidity right now. And there's other malware. So if one of the more expensive techniques that you would use, especially if you got something annoying like this VM wrapped craziness, is to run it inside of a virtual machine. And so you observe what is its actual behavior instead of trying to look for properties. And that's very intuitive because if you see it starts encrypting the entire file system, okay, this is definitely bad. Just shut it down. And then it doesn't matter that you couldn't sort of figure out like how to look at it because you just sort of saw what it did. That has two problems. One, it's very expensive to just run things inside a VM. And then malware can detect that it's inside a virtual machine and alter its behavior. So it may not operate the same way inside of a virtual machine as it does on a regular like desktop or laptop. And there are even virtual machine escapes where there are flaws in the virtual machine software that the malware can then exit the VM and take hold in the host operating system. So you can potentially have a situation where like you were trying to run the malware safely inside of a virtual machine, and in doing so, you have infected yourself. So that's like stuff on some of the higher end of just like annoying stuff that you might have to deal with and can make it like, well, yeah, if they put in that level of effort, like I'm not necessarily going to catch that. But at the same time, I've seen malware that is literally like, so inside an executable, there's different section names for the different kinds of content. So there's a .data section where you might store like some images, or a .code or .text for where the actual code is. There's other different other uncommon section names. And I've seen malware that literally renamed the code section to .virus, which was like,
Thanks.
Okay, I believe you. I'll just quarantine you now. I've seen malware with like literal like poems about their like weird manifestos about like why they're doing this or why people deserve it or whatever. Like there's all sorts of dumb stuff that you see too. So it's this sort of huge spectrum of sophistication or lack thereof that we're dealing with when we're talking about malware. So yeah, even though there's always like this little bit you're just not going to get, the more you can, the more you're still helping people.